Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the DHSS. We are about to kick off to keep to time this morning for session 3, which is a cluster of great abstracts and presentations looking at novel interventions to improve performance. And our first speaker this morning is Lucy Albertella. So take it away, Lucy.
Okay, just going to share my screen. And I trust everyone's looking at the correct thing. Okay, so great. So thank you for being here at our talk today. So this talk will be presented by Rebecca Kirkham and myself. Rebecca and I are researchers from Brain Park at Monash University, and the project we're presenting was conducted in partnership with the Department of Defence. So in this talk, we're going to be describing the background, methods, and the findings from our recent Delphi study that sought to establish a transdisciplinary expert consensus on the cognitive drivers of performance under pressure. So just to give you a little bit of a background, the ability to perform optimally under pressure in dynamic, high-stakes environments is critical across many occupations, including the military, first responders, and competitive sport. And this ability is known to depend on a range of key cognitive processes. However, while many of these cognitive processes could be assumed to be common across application domains, research within each domain has progressed separately within their own domain-specific silos. And this has led to largely inefficient progress and wasted opportunities to learn from each other and to share resources toward the common goal of strengthening the field's capacity to measure and optimize performance under pressure. And these issues have led to calls for an integrated framework of high-performance cognition to combine existing knowledge and resources and to unify future progress. However, unifying the performance field is not actually as easy as it sounds. A major barrier to unification is that each domain uses its own terminology and measures. And even when the different domains do use the same terms, they're often used to mean different things, or they're used in such different contexts that the processes involved are more likely to be different than similar. And a way to overcome this barrier when bringing knowledge together across the different domains is to use a common language such as neuroscience. And in addition to offering a common language to combine the existing knowledge, neuroscience has the added advantage of directly translating into mechanistic insights that can inform mechanism-sensitive assessments and targeted interventions to optimize performance. So I guess in more ways than one, neuroscience has real potential to advance the performance field. So to address the long-standing problem of a lack of a unified framework in the lack of a unified framework of high-performance cognition, we sought to integrate existing knowledge through a neuroscience-guided Delphi study to establish a transdisciplinary expert consensus on the cognitive drivers of performance under pressure. And Rebecca will now explain the methods that we use to do this.
Thanks, Lucy. So the Delphi technique is an iterative process where the opinions of experts are sought, and then in the following survey, their responses are fed back to them along with a group response. The process is repeated until consensus is established on each item. So this process, as Lucy mentioned before, the current project used a modified Delphi technique in the sense that it actually ran 4 parallel Delphi surveys, each for defence, sport and competition, civilian high stakes, and performance neuroscience groups. And the aim of this approach was to find out the constructs that are critical to performance under pressure. It was clear from the outset, though, that we needed to make sure that our Delphi was suited to each of these domains, and ultimately we didn't know very much about any of them. So we decided to consult with leading experts across the key domains to help us refine the project. So briefly, our expert advisory panel members were Dr. Amy Adler, expert in military resilience, Mr. John Crampton, a renowned sports psychologist in the elite sport industry, Professor Sean Drummond, expert in sleep research and resilience in high-stakes roles, Professor Gerard Fogarty, expert in resilience across high-performance fields, Professor James Gross, expert in emulation, and Professor Leonard Zajkowski, expert in neuroscience of sport performance. As a result of discussions co-designing the project with our expert advisory group, we refined our research question to ask specifically, what are the psychological constructs that underlie optimal performance in dynamic and high pressure environments? Notably, we were interested in those constructs that relate to individual differences in real-time performance execution that are key to consistent, sustained optimal performance. And this could apply to any level of expertise from novice to expert and across environments that are dynamic, have the capacity to change, and that involve an element of risk or pressure. A key feature of the current Delphi was its use of the neuroscience-driven research domain criteria framework, or RDoC, to guide the selection of constructs. And the RDoC is a research framework that takes a dimensional approach to understanding mental disorders, viewing mental health and illness as reflecting variations of functioning in biobehavioral systems that span from normal to abnormal. And the RDoC is organised by 6 domains of functioning, as you can see here. These are negative valence, positive valence, cognitive systems, social processes, arousal and regulatory systems, and sensory motor systems. And within each of these domains, there is a list of constructs that comprise different aspects of that domain's range of functions. So while we are using the RDoC constructs to guide this Delphi study, there is a really important distinction between the RDoC framework and the current Delphi, which is that the current Delphi study did not focus on the range of functioning that spans from normal to abnormal, but rather it focused on functioning at the other end of the spectrum, that is, the spectrum of optimal functioning. So finally, on top of the RDoC constructs, we added 3 constructs suggested by the experts, which were critical to optimal performance, but were not covered by the RDoC. And these constructs were processing speed, shifting, and interoception. We invited experts across 4 domains, as I mentioned before, including both practitioners and academics. And we worked with the advisory team in choosing the criteria for inclusion, which differed between these academics and practitioners. And the advisory team also suggested experts to invite. So within their respective panels, experts were asked to rate each RDoC construct and the expert suggested constructs according to their importance for optimal performance in dynamic, high-pressure environments, with rating options ranging from not at all important to critically important. The constructs rated as important or critically important by 80% or more of a given panel went straight through into the final set for that domain, and constructs considered not important by 60% or more of a panel were excluded from that point on, as were constructs that had also reached stability. Constructs that did not meet these exclusion criteria were then entered into the next round and were presented alongside the group response, and this process was repeated until no constructs were left to be considered. And finally, we asked experts to rank the constructs that had reached consensus within their respective panels. And now I'll pass over to Lucy for our results.
Okay, thank you, Beck. So 68 experts entered the study and completed the first Delphi survey. And of these experts, 64 stayed all the way to the end of the Delphi surveys, all 3 surveys and the ranking. And this means that we had a retention rate of 94%. The highest retention rates were seen in the sport and performance neuroscience panels, both at 100%, followed by defence at 95% and civilian high stakes at 81%. Overall, we had experts across 11 different countries, with Australia, the US and the UK having the highest representation across panels. So 10 constructs reached consensus across all 4 panels. 7 of these constructs were from the cognitive systems domain, which I've highlighted in green. And these were attention, performance monitoring, goal selection, updating, representation and maintenance, response selection, inhibition and suppression, flexible updating, active maintenance and interference control. Other constructs came from the social processes and the arousal and regulatory systems domains, and these were self-knowledge and arousal respectively. And finally, one non-RDoC construct also reached transdisciplinary consensus, and this was shifting. And this had been suggested by the experts. So the top 3 constructs for each panel differed somewhat across the 4 panels, but attention are featured across all panels. And was rated the #1 construct across the 3 applied domains. So in terms of the implications of this work and the next steps, so the findings of this Delphi are expected to make a significant contribution to the performance field through having established a preliminary integrated framework of high performance cognition, which can be used to define the standards and systematize methods for future research in this space. In terms of the immediate next steps, these key constructs are going to be informing the development of an assessment battery that will help identify high potential regardless of experience or background, as well as enabling the detection of changes in performance-related neurocognition. And this in turn may be used to flag risk for performance decline and also to direct necessary support to affected individuals. And finally, having a set of neuroscience-informed, expert-selected constructs will inform the development of individually tailored cognitive training tools that can target the specific neurocognitive mechanisms that will enhance performance under high pressure according to each individual's performance needs. And that's it, the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lucy and Rebecca, for a great presentation there. Apologise for not introducing you, Rebecca. Just a reminder to everybody that you need to put your questions in the Hoover app is the preferred place to do that. So just log into that session there and have it toggled running parallel if you're opening Zoom, and then we can see all your questions here. But I'm just wondering if you could tell me, I noticed that some of us probably be familiar with the more cognitive domains there that you brought up. I'm just wondering if you could provide a little bit more details on what would consist of the shifting framework.
So shifting is it's involved in cognitive flexibility, and it's essentially the ability to shift your attentional set or attention to different sets.
Excellent.
I think we've got the official description that we used. I think Beck's got that, but maybe not. Let's see.
I'll find it, one second.
It's the ability to flexibly switch back and forth between tasks or mental sets.
So updating and switching as they go along, tasking and whatnot. Excellent. And so where to from here?
So the next steps, as in the directly immediate next steps, will be we're developing an assessment battery to be able to gauge these cognitive processes within the higher end of the functioning spectrum. So while the tasks are currently have been validated in the at-risk population, which is what the RDoC has been used in, we're going to be seeing whether they're just as sensitive at the higher end of the spectrum.
Great. Well, best of luck with that.
Thank you.
I noticed that there's no other questions in the app at the minute, so I might close this presentation now. Thank you so much for presenting for us today, and great work, and look forward to see what comes out next. So just as a reminder, from a housekeeping point of view, please put your questions in the Hoover app. It's really easy for us to track that. Yep, if you could do that. So, and I actually forgot to introduce myself before we started this morning, and I'm Katie Tooley. I'm from DST, and I work at Edinburgh, and I work in the land division in the cognition and behaviour work group. So moving right along, we're clicking to time schedule, which is, we're running actually a little bit ahead of time. I might just get Lauren Fortington, who will be presenting on behalf of her authors today, which the lead author on the paper is Joanne Stannard, and she will be presenting a presentation on improving musculoskeletal injury surveillance methods in Special Operation Forces, a Delphi consensus study. So Lauren, if you are there, Oh, no, actually, this is a pre-recording. I forgot about that. Apologies. And this will go straight through the recording.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining today. My name's Dr. Lauren Fortington. I'm presenting this work on behalf of Joanne Stannard, our PhD scholar, who is driving this work, and also co-author Professor Caroline Finch. I'm joining from Wadawurrung today and would just like to acknowledge and pay my thanks to the traditional owners. Injury surveillance is a continuous and systematic process for the collection, analysis and interpretation of injury information. It's essentially the who, what, when, where and why. So we're saying who gets injured, what types of injuries do they sustain, when do these injuries occur, where geographically do they occur, or operationally, and why do they occur, or how. Why is this so important? It's really to provide us with the foundations and the data that helps us monitor health problems that we know about, helps us to look into options for prevention. We're able to allocate resources according to those priority areas and those bigger issues, whether that's the most injuries or the most severe injuries, or those that result in the most time off. And we can evaluate those interventions that we do put in place. So it's really important to have that information and have it both routinely collected, systematically collected, so in the same way, and also to share that information afterwards. The PhD research for Joanne began with a systematic review of what is known about injuries in Special Operation Forces. So we used published literature, all parts of the world, and just looked at what is currently reported and how. And it was really apparent that the methods used are inconsistent across and within countries. For the most part, injuries are largely underestimated, and there's really insufficient detail to direct our prevention planning. So often we're not reporting the location of the injury or how it occurred. Without that type of information, we're limited in what we can do for the next steps of prevention. So we know that injuries occur. We know they occur probably more than what we currently report, but we don't know how or why they occur and the best ways to prevent them. With those reporting gaps in mind, the aim of today's research was gaining consensus on the types of data requirements and surveillance methods that would be most relevant to Special Operation Forces, what information must be collected, how it should be collected and reported, in order to gain some consistency and traction in the surveillance, so the ongoing routine and systematic collection that I mentioned earlier. So this study used a Delphi study design, which is essentially a series of questionnaires put to an expert group who will ideally converge towards consensus or agreement on a topic. So this is our facilitator, who was Joanne, and we recruited a group of experts in special operations and injury surveillance. They were given a survey, responded to that survey. It comes back to the facilitator and then back to the experts a few times before we reach consensus on a number of items. We'll take you through each of those steps in a moment. We used a purposive sampling technique, and there were 3 main groups across international and domestic settings. So we had authors of published special operation injury research that we had identified from that earlier systematic review. There were 10 people recruited from that group. Authors of injury epi research in conventional military forces within the last 5 years. So we identified 15 experts from that group. And we also recruited 5 ADF personnel through Joint Health Command who had organisational experience with public health or preventative medicine in that musculoskeletal area. So there were 30 in total that we wanted to include as the experts for our group. The questionnaire was based around 4 key themes. The first was the World Health Organization injury surveillance guidelines. So we looked at what information they suggest as minimum data and optional data to be collected on injury surveillance. Second, we used the International Olympic Committee consensus statement on injury and illness in sport. This is sort of designed for high-level elite professional sports. And we knew that some of the injuries in that setting overlap with the Special Operations Forces. We also used the Workplace Health Safety Compensation and Reporting Database of the Australian Department of Defence, because obviously this is also relevant to the setting, and we brought those 3 major guidelines together and identified commonalities and differences between them. And we also, of course, used the findings from our systematic review. We knew that some things were really well reported and others we would see more challenges. There were 42 questions presented to the experts in the first round of the Delphi, and they responded with a mix of Likert scales and rankings, and could elaborate by providing some additional open text responses as well. So from the 30 invitations to our expert group, we received 16 yes responses, so just over 50% response rate. Most were researchers or clinicians with a median of 26 years of experience, so they were a highly experienced group. The participants were from 4 different countries, and 40% had prior experience working directly with special operation forces. There were 2 rounds required. We were debating the 3rd round going ahead, but ultimately we had got to a section, which I'll elaborate on later, that we felt was not going to be resolved, and therefore it needed a different approach to answer those final questions and seek agreement. So 2 Delphi rounds on, and we reached consensus on most items, and I'll explain further what the other ones were. Overall, there was really strong agreement that a consistent approach to injury surveillance between countries is needed. Importantly with that, most people also recognise that we're at different places in different countries, and there needs to be a level of pragmatism as we introduce so-called strict guidelines. So the guidelines that we've designed are intended as a first step to supporting accurate, consistent and reliable surveillance, and not a final step. There will need to be some tweaking, if you like. But overall, the intention behind the guidelines was really, really well supported. From the research, we made 5 recommendations. The first draws on what I've noted on the previous slide, in that future injury surveillance is encouraged to pragmatically follow the surveillance recommendations in supporting accurate and consistent injury collection and reporting. We know there will be challenges. One of the major thoughts around overcoming some of those challenges is that we need to get better at providing information back to the commanders or physical training instructors and those who can use the information. Recommendation 2 addresses the minimum information required to understand injuries for this population. The items align really closely with the World Health Organization guidelines for injury surveillance, with the exception of employment. Employment was considered necessary by the expert group because it gives us the information on what role specifically that personnel are performing, and also their experience level, so whether they're trainees or more experienced in their position. The only item we didn't have consensus on was around sex, and this was largely around the redundancy in the question, because there is often an all-male population. Policies are changing. We had a look at different policies across the different countries, and our recommendation is at this stage is that you follow organisational policy with respect to collecting information on sex. Each of these 7 items, age, employment, injury, intent and so forth, have some information provided on the categories you might like to include in your data collection, and information on why that's important. Recommendation 3 addresses the reason I noted earlier about not going to a 3rd round of Delphi survey. So military-specific activity causation codes should be developed to accurately identify activities most at risk and allow risk management prioritisation. There was no agreement on methods to record activity causation. We talked about the use of the International Classification of Diseases external cause codes and other military-specific coding, but ultimately the group agreed that concise activity causation and injury mechanism codes is necessary and important. So we decided that that would be a project of its own and put that to the side and said, okay, we'll call it and we'll put this as something that needs to happen. We weren't going to solve it in this one project. So just being aware that our understanding of how the injuries occur is quite limited at the moment. Recommendation 4. No matter how good our injury surveillance is or how good our injury surveillance guidelines are, if we don't know about the injuries, then we will underestimate them. So we know that reporting of injuries is a bit of a problem in this population. Our expert group brought it up frequently, and research from conventional militaries has shown that it's up to like half of soldiers won't report an injury. Various reasons thought to be part of that, one of which being negative career consequences. Ultimately, it will impact our injury findings, so it's actually really important that we look into why people aren't forthcoming with their injuries. Jo's going to explore this more in her second part of her PhD, trying to cover some of the reasons. We're also looking at it in a similar way within the sports injury group, maybe not calling it an injury, but something else. It's just a bit of a pain or a bit of a functional impairment. It is important to look at, and that was raised by the group as well. So we're going to investigate that a little further. So no matter how good your surveillance is, we still need to note at the moment that a limitation of our surveillance research is that we probably have missed some or many injuries. Recommendation 5 addresses the essence of surveillance. So health surveillance isn't just collecting data in, it's also about getting data back out to people who can action that information. So regular distribution to the stakeholders that are involved, whether that's the people who collect the information, whether it's the health personnel, the commanders, the physical training instructors, whoever needs to know should be told at a regular interval. It's something that's often forgotten. We're busy collecting information but not reporting it back. And so that was the 5th recommendation that we really wanted to make sure people are aware of. We used the Delphi study design, and I think it was really well suited to the research problem, but of course it has some challenges. Probably 2 main considerations, one being that consensus doesn't mean it's right or that, it's perfect. It means that we're happy to move in this direction based on the opinion of a group. And that's the other major consideration, being it's the opinion of a group. So we don't have everyone that's knowledgeable, but we had a good group of experts. Probably the disappointing thing, we had 10 authors who have previously published research into Special Operation Force injuries, but 7 of them did not want to participate in this survey, and we didn't get a reason about why that was. We don't know, so it could be that they're just busy, or it could be that they don't agree. So we've got that initial bias within the group who are interested in this population. So we know that's a challenge with the research. We had 4 countries because it was online and we were able to engage with more people in that way, but that's still not representative of all nations, of course. But what we did find is that they were a very pragmatic group. So they didn't all have experience in special operations, but they all had really good experience in military surveillance. So we think that these guidelines are quite transferable to conventional militaries, not just to special operations. And ultimately, the idea is that we go out and test and use and seek feedback on them. And that's ultimately the next step. We encourage these guidelines to be trialled. They've been published in an open access format so that we can distribute them and share them and use them widely. We encourage feedback on what works well, what doesn't work. Guidelines can be adapted and tweaked. Different categories can be added if we find that that's necessary. The other next step is to reconsider military-specific activity, mechanism, causation data, and looking into those behaviour reporting issues that we talked about. Thank you. Thanks for your interest today in this work. Of course, a huge thank you to Jo. This is her work. It's driven by her from day one. Her email is there, and we welcome feedback and questions. I'd also just like to acknowledge the grant funding that we received from Defence Science Centre WA, which has enabled us to continue on this research. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that pre-record, Lauren. And she's here today to join us for a quick Q&A session. So I'm going to shoot off one quick question just because I can, because I'm chairing. And so I'm curious because I haven't worked in Delphi studies beforehand. So I guess if there are limitations to what Delphi can bring to the table, do we have another option, or is that all we have that can allow those sorts of consensus to come to answer?
It's certainly not the only way. It's a nice way to get going with things, and because we already had so it's a little bit different to the first speakers today, but who were really trying to identify what was needed for the tool initially. We already have quite a lot of insights as to what might be needed for the tool. It was about refining that. And so for us, Adelphi was good because we could integrate with particularly the US and some other international groups doing that online. Ideally, you'd all get together in a room and have a robust discussion as well. That way you can really flesh out ideas. There are other ways, but it's just a nice, by providing that first round of surveys back to the experts, they can reflect on whether you provide that back and also what everyone else has said and where they sat. And it just gives them that moment to reflect and think, oh, is this really, really necessary or important? It's used a lot to get guidelines together. And as I said, it's hard. A lot of time people think consensus means it's right, but it's just what we're happy to use going forward as a start point, really. There's a lot of consensus statements. My work's primarily in sport medicine. We've got consensus statements everywhere. It's what's practical and works for the field.
Right. Great. Thank you very much, Lauren. It's a very well answered question. So we have several questions now, which is great. So we've got one here from Phil Temby. What might be done to address injury underreporting in special operation forces, and any insights or lessons that could be drawn from the sporting domain?
It's like you've asked a question. It's like I've planted a question and I haven't. It's an area we're working in a lot in sport medicine as well. And I've in the past likened our soldiers to dancers, when people look at me a bit shocked, but actually the professional dancers are the ones who, if they don't perform, they don't get paid, and they're working through some very severe injuries. And what we're starting to do within the sports setting is change the terminology. An elite athlete doesn't have an injury. Well, conventionally, they just live with an injury and they play with it for the whole year. They manage it. And so we're talking more about signs and symptoms and impairment and functional impairment. So changing some of the terminology we use, not saying it's an injury, but actually it's just a 1 to 10 on a pain scale or a 1 to 10 on a functional scale. So there's some different ways we can now collect that information. We're still working out the best ways to use that information going forward. So we know how to collect it quite well using a Oslo Sports Trauma Research Centre questionnaire, but actually making sense of what we're collecting and really being able to drive answers out of that collection is still a little bit of work to go, but definitely on that path. And I think we're going to find the same thing with defence. If we start changing, not saying it's a medical attention, you've had to go to the doctor, it's quite a bad injury at that point, but changing up what it's doing functionally. My training is reduced at the moment, or my training is ceased at the moment, or I'm on a particular rehab path at the moment, rather than it being I'm injured. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's
using good question. Thank you.
It is, and using the good terminology to really not make it a bad situation is so powerful. I don't think,
ultimately it's not an injury to them. So Jo's second part of her research is going to go out and explore, what physically is, what would you refer to it as and call it, and explore some of the language that they want to use.
That's great. There's quite a few questions here, so we may not get through all of them. So just as a heads up, you'll probably need to spend some time in the Q&A and get back to these. There's one here from Nick Beagley. With the increase in commercial health and performance tracking technologies, is there scope for greater personal ownership of health and performance data? and the approaches to self-improvement and treatment in partnership with the medical and coaching community. That's a long one.
Yes, a resounding yes. I think, again, coming from my experience in sports medicine, we're pushing for much more ownership of data by the athletes themselves. It was kind of fine when it was a football player and their hamstring strain is listed in the newspaper, and that was one thing, it's pretty publicly known. As we've developed our injury surveillance, it started to sort of divulge into illness and health complaints, and we're really pushing medical legal boundaries with what we share and what we collect of an athlete. So we're really stamping down on what we collect and making sure the athletes know that that's collected for a reason. Certain people do not have permissions for certain parts, and I think we need to do potentially something similar. It's different in a workplace, and it's different in a unique workplace like military, but it's got to go that way. Otherwise, like I hate going, oh, we're all going to get sued. But this is people's health data, and it's not for us all to know about. But we need to know about some parts of it in order to give them the right performance pushes. So having a way to sort of manage the data behind the scenes and just give a generic, this is a level 4 training at the moment, gives an indication of how hard they can push or whatever it might be. I don't know the answers yet, but yes, being able to manage your own fatigue and training and so forth, have a good awareness of that, and having people trust that best to sit out or push harder or whatever it might be. It's an awesome space to be exploring, but no answers as yet. Certainly more protective though.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
And we've probably got time for one more quick one, and then I will defer you to go and have a look at the chat and deal with the questions that are there, which are looking very good. This is one from Major Emma Williams. Do you think these guidelines are relevant to conventional forces? Why was the SOF population used?
Yes. So we expect that they're going to be quite transferable, because we haven't got that mechanistic stuff in there yet. We haven't been able to work out the real activity. The original intention behind special operations is Jo is a physio within that group, and she kept seeing the same musculoskeletal injuries coming in to her clinic, and she was just getting more and more frustrated at preventable injuries. And so we went down that path initially. And we do know a little bit about conventional military, but very little about special ops. I mean, it's a secretive business, so that's another limitation. But we do think they're going to be transferable. They're very generic, and there's reasoning provided behind each of the inclusions. And as I said, they align quite closely with the general injury surveillance guidelines from WHO, which cover all types of injury. So especially for that essential data set. What comes after this, there's an essential data set you must have, and then an optional, and you sort of tweak that depending on your population and your questions and your needs. And so that's the part where we hope to narrow down and have a really strong, specific sort of groups in that optional data set, but definitely transferable. Yeah, we hope to test that. So please.
Great. Well, that takes us to our time limit right now, Lauren. So hop into the Q&A, and you can see those questions that are still remaining. So we are moving on to our next presenter, which is Chris Brady, and he is presenting a presentation on improving soldier targeting performance through head and weapon mounted displays. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, well, good. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Brady from Land Division at DSC. I'm going to present this research, which was first shown at DHSS in 2019 as a methodology, as a poster. We got some really good feedback, so I'm really glad to be able to follow it up with the results for you all. I'd like to thank Angela and Sasha for their help with the data collection for this, and Ryan's our engineer, and he did a lot of software and hardware work for this. Now, full disclosure, there's more than 15 minutes worth of slides here, but I have been practicing, Katie, so I'll keep it to 15 minutes. Okay, so what's the issue? Defence industry upgrades their products and also develops new products some of these new products are offering new capabilities, and when they're intended for soldiers, for dismounted soldiers, what we have is a soldier being given a piece of equipment unlike anything they've ever had before. So in order for us to understand the extent to which such equipment would be of benefit to them, we need to do initial assessment. So in a nutshell, this study was a virtual reality-based study where we mimicked 6 potential new capabilities, had real soldiers assess them, and we collected objective feedback and a focus group at the end. So we looked at, so the activity in question is a targeting activity, something soldiers are very well trained in. They have to look for targets, identify whether the target was an ally, a neutral, so a farmer, or an enemy. And if it was an enemy, they had to engage them straight away. We have all that data now. What's the military impact? We've been asked to describe this. That's easy. We're doing this work in direct support of the dismounted combat program within Army headquarters. Specifically the LAN 159 project, which is the Small Arms Acquisition Project. And so our product to DCP will be advice in the form of data and recommendations on how they might want to proceed with these new capabilities when the defence industry comes knocking at their door. Okay, so experimental design, as mentioned, this is a study in which we use VR headsets, and we had the soldiers who are the participants operating in a virtual environment, and they had to detect targets, identify and engage them. Some of this is based on work that the US SOCOM has done with respect to their hyper-enabled operator, but due to time, I won't go into that. What we're really trying to do is emulate what a soldier in the field with an augmented reality display, so a transparent display might do. And at times, so what we're going to do is give them 6 different pieces of information during this activity, one at a time, and to see the extent to which their reaction time is improved due to the new information they're getting. So we have a little scenario I'll go into in a bit more detail later. All you really need to know from this slide is that we had 43 soldiers that went through the activity. On the whole, they were very mature and very experienced soldiers. Most of them had deployed on operations. There were over half of them were at least corporal level, which was really good. Not only meant they were very well trained in the tasks that we were asking them to complete, but at the focus group at the end, the feedback we received from them was just phenomenal. It was fantastic. Method, pre-trial data collection. We gave a bunch of different types of screens to the potential participants just to make sure there was no reason to exclude anyone, but that didn't need to happen. And of note for this trial, all we're looking at is reaction time. Okay, so what equipment did we use? So the VR system was an Oculus Quest 1. That was the hardware, that's what they wore on their head, and Ryan, our engineer, had some good use for the hand systems with regard to tracking the rifle. We used Unreal Engine 4, which is a piece of software generally used for games, but it served our purpose in developing this scenario perfectly. Ryan put together an instrumented rifle. The base of this rifle is actually what we call the modular weapon. We've had this in Land Division, or Land Operations Division, for 15 years plus. A whole bunch of different studies have used this, and little bits have been tacked on as needed. So I'm glad it's still being used. Ryan added some buttons, so if a participant saw a target, they pressed a button. If they then identified what kind of target it was friendly, they clicked one button. If it was a neutral target, a farmer, they clicked another button. If it was an enemy, they didn't really click a button, they just pressed the trigger, fired the trigger, they had to engage. But it was all, so that was one of the main ways in which we collected data. Here are the targets. They're all actually the same model within the scenario, all the same face. They varied on the uniform type they had, the webbing that they wore, and the weapon that they carried or didn't carry. Of note, some of the neutrals did carry weapons, because in Afghanistan, for example, farmers, it's not uncommon for them to have rifles to protect their land. They're not aggressive, but don't assume someone with a rifle is an enemy. And that we had just over 50% of the targets presented were actually enemy, just to give us a good data set. Each participant saw about 240 targets over 2 hours. And 43 participants, so we had a good data set to work from. Very quickly, this is what the participants saw. No, they could look left and right, but they couldn't move. As soon as you move, then you change the shape and the attitude of the targets. So they were at an observation post is the scenario guidance we gave them. This is a top-down view. The participant is, his avatar is in a green box, and the area of regard is in blue. The red squares are potential spawn points for the target. So it was only ever one target at a time, and there were no target conditions. So, and there was some randomness with which the speed with which a new target presented itself. The aim was that the soldier, the participant, would scan their arc left to right as they're trained to do, looking for targets. It's a bit of a cluttered environment, as you can probably tell. So there's no plain screen, so some of the targets are quite hard to see. So I can't go into this due to time, but this is the framework from which we hung the decision component of the targeting activity from. So observe, orient, decide, act, or the OODA loop, as we usually call it, is one means by which we can think about decisions that we need to make, usually rapid decisions, knowing that new information is about to come in that may change our decision and our action subsequently. And it's a way, and within an army, they call it the OODA loop, and you've got to make it nice and fast. And the theory is that if your OODA loop is faster than the enemy's OODA loop, that is a good thing. But really, it's just this section here where we look at detect, identify, and engage. That's all I want you to look at now. As you can see, we have a baseline activity for each of these, plus 2 targeting age components for each. I'm just going to check on the time. Baseline is the in-service EF88 and the expected DR rifle sight. Both of them had a high fidelity model within the scenario, and the movement within the game, within VR, was slave to the movement of the dummy rifle that they were holding. That was one of the things that Ryan set up to work very well. So detection, the first activity was a diamond cue. So the scenario is there's a UAV loitering in the area. It sees a target, doesn't know what it is, but via whatever loop you want to talk about, of which it's not really relevant for the study, the participant or the soldier receives information that there is a target in this area and a diamond is put over it. We chose that diamond and that size. I'll go into it. I can't go into all this detail, but for results, we found that soldier reaction time to detect a target decrease was better with using the diamond than with the baseline activity. The soldiers liked it, they preferred it. One thing to note though, the means by which they scan their environment changed significantly when the diamond was present. And this is subjective, qualitative feedback to us. We didn't actually measure this ourselves, but they looked at, once they knew they were looking for a target, which was a high contrast thing to look for, they relaxed a little. So what we had actually done was try to improve their behavior, which we had, but we actually changed their behavior as well. And we're not sure if that's a good thing, not sure. Anyway, I'll press on. Second detect is a compass ribbon, which, as you can see from the picture, is literally a ribbon above their head. It's a compass, but is the enemy or target there and a mark up there. One of the advantages of this is that it allows the participant to easily know if there's a target behind it. That was the biggest advantage. And it was actually allowed them to detect targets faster than baseline. So now going to identify remote rifle sight. So this is a high resolution camera on the side of the rifle, zero to the rifle. And the idea is it allows, the output of the video is projected onto the VR/AR display of the soldier. The idea being they can get a high resolution digital version of what they're looking at, the target, without having to show a rifle. One of the main problems we had with this is that it was very central to cant. So if you canted your rifle, so you rolled your rifle, it meant the target moved. Real world implications of that I'm not sure of, but that wouldn't happen with an optical sight. Okay, so this was no faster than baseline. And we got some feedback on the difficulty in controlling the rifle when it isn't on your shoulder. I think that's a training issue as much as anything. The question, of course, is, do they need to be trained in this? Is there something beneficial about this over the way they do things at the moment? We know from some previous work on off-axis shooting, so shooting around a corner or over a wall, that there's very little overlap in training transfer between the two activities, normal for shooting and that kind of shooting. So if it's desired, training will need to be included. No, I'm not biased, but this is my favourite one. Percent enemy indicator. This actually came directly from two different industry players who have got this product in development, something similar, whereby they highlight a target and give the percent chance that that target is an enemy based on certain criteria, based on algorithms that they own. One of them even purported to have positive identification ability, so that is identifying a specific person, which is pretty cool in a sense, but I was wondering what is the extent to which that is actually helpful to a soldier, because they are trained pretty well to detect and identify targets. So we gave this to soldiers, and percent enemy target aid was no faster than baseline. Trust was a really big issue. There was this issue that if it's 80% chance it's an enemy, that means there's 20% chance I'm shooting at a neutral or a friendly. So there was a lot of debate and discussion about this, which we've got record of, and it's exactly the kind of information we needed from the subject matter experts we had, which we can then pass off to Army headquarters. There were, I noted at the bottom throughout the focus groups, there were a few positive things to say about this, but at least we know now. And trust was one of the big issues. Final two, engage. So remote rifle sight, this is the same technology as I described a minute ago, but instead of identifying a target, you're actually engaging. There was no faster than baseline. Again, the soldiers complained about the ability to accurately control this sight when it wasn't on their shoulder. The last one, which is a good idea but didn't go down so well, this was the digital red dot. So what it's trying to simulate is a red aiming laser, targeting laser, but one that doesn't actually exist in the real world or even in the virtual world. It only exists in the AR system, and the AR system knows the attitude, angle, location of the weapon and of the enemy, and it actually draws a line and displays it on the head-mounted display. So no one else can see this laser. Most adversaries at the moment will have the ability to see infrared lasers that we have. This is maybe a means to overcome it. It does require high accuracy though. However, I think it's a limitation of VR. This is the only aid that was significantly slower. One of the issues was that the resolution of the display that they were looking through meant that the laser didn't change size, doesn't matter where you were looking at. So for targets in the distance, the laser, the red dot, was actually the same size as the target. Makes it a bit difficult to target the target. But that's in some ways a weakness of it. Okay, so that's all the things. Two more slides, this and conclusions. So this was a controlled lab trial. Okay, so direct results don't reflect how actions might take place in the real world. However, the comparison between, for any individual, and the performance of different devices is useful to know. Of course, I should have mentioned it's a repeated measures study. More training is required. Soldiers were very enthusiastic about this work and very easy to say, yep, I understand what's going on, let's get into it. But it was obvious that they did actually need to have a bit more training. with the system that we had set up. Didn't really make a big difference to the results, but yeah, it was noticed. And although we were looking at cognitive performance in some ways, detection and identification and engagement, they all require different steps in the cognitive process. We didn't actually deconstruct and go into those ourselves. So last slide. So in summary, our aim was to speed up the OODA loop with novel targeting aids. And we did this with the diamond and the compass ribbon targeting aids. However, the red dot, the digital red dot, actually slowed things down and made things worse. Of note, the diamond changed the soldiers' search patterns, and I'm not sure what that means. But it makes me think that tactics, training, and procedures might need to change if some of these capabilities are adopted. And introducing an aid to a cognitive function may not just improve it, but as we're thinking, it may also alter it, which is sort of step 2 of the study. And that is it. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks so much, Chris. That's a very complete study and some great data from which to learn from into the future. There's several questions in the chat, so I'll direct you to go and have a look in there if you could tend to those, but we've probably got time for just one. And the one from here from Susanna Whitney. Hi, Chris Brady, that's a great study. Do you think there's a risk that the AR overlay could reduce overall situational awareness?
The aim is to do the opposite, of course. It's very well known that too much information, won't be even perceived by the human in a high-stress environment. So we do have a filter against too much information. But if there's a low-level stimulus, something that we're not even thinking about half the time, that might become very bothersome during high-stress scenarios. That's what I'm thinking with regard to AR. Short answer is yes.
Great, and we still have time for one more, and that is from Phil Temby. Well done on a very practical study. Dismounted soldiers operate in a variety of complex environments. What was the rationale for using the farmstead scenario? Any plans for study replication using other scenarios? Yeah, good point. The farmstead was cluttered, so there's a lot of things in the background. It was very rare you had a target just against a grassy background. They always had lots of different things to look at. We wanted the participant to be searching hard for these targets. It didn't need to be. We actually thought about a marketplace, but that meant there were other people there as well. And you'd have to model that, and it was a bit too hard. So, but that was the other option that we were considering. I think what you're getting at is there might be a need for a secondary stimulus in the environment, almost a distractor to the participant. And I think that that would be an interesting, providing it's relevant to soldiers, that could be an interesting study. Great, thanks, Chris. Have a jump onto the Q&A, and if you could have a look at those questions and answer them, that would be fabulous. But in the interest of time, we will continue to move on. And our next speaker today is Zachariah Cross, who will be presenting on predicting team performance from neural activity, evidence from real-world military training. Thank you, Zachariah.
Thank you for coming to my talk titled Neural Signatures of Teamwork, Evidence from Real-World Military Training. So preparing individuals and teams to perform effectively in challenging operating environments is a priority for defence human performance research. And while the majority of our research in this space has used behavioural measures and electrophysiological measures such as galvanic skin responses and heart rate activity to help characterise the best ways we can prepare our defence personnel for optimal performance, little is known regarding the neural bases of optimal performance in these environments, particularly from a military perspective. More basic neuroscience research also is typically conducted in tightly controlled laboratory environments, so it's often been difficult to generalise these results to a more realistic or ecologically valid context. Further, there's even less known regarding the neural basis of team-based performance, particularly in naturalistic conditions. So current research hasn't really advanced to the point of being able to characterise both team-based performance, and particularly in a team-based military context, and relating such activity to the neural bases of cognition. So one particularly useful and relatively cost-effective way of characterising the neural bases of brain activity under real-world conditions is electroencephalography, or EEG. So EEG is a method for monitoring electrical brain activity, and this is achieved by placing electrodes on the scalp and recording activity during different states. So my PhD research involved recording people's brain activity while they learn certain languages and during different stages of sleep. But we can also do this. We can also characterise neural activity during different tasks. And also, while EEG has poor spatial resolution, so it's not that great in determining where the signals of neural activity are being generated, it has very good temporal resolution. So we're able to characterise when certain patterns in brain activity are occurring on a millisecond timescale. So there are typically two ways of characterising EEG activity and relating it to cognition. So the first is resting state EEG. So this involves simply having a participant sit there with their eyes closed for 2 minutes while we continuously record their EEG activity. And we're able to extract a number of useful metrics from just even 2 minutes of restful EEG. Another way of characterising neural activity and relating it to cognition is through task-related activity. So here on figure B, this is a typical EEG setup of a sentence processing task. So we can actually have a look at what's happening in the brain during the presentation of each word and relate that to, say, behaviour. So how grammatical or plausible this sentence may be processed by the participant. So based on this raw EEG signal, we can decompose it into typically 5 canonical frequency bands. Here I have delta, theta, alpha, and beta, but the 5th is gamma, so above 30 hertz. And so these canonical frequency bands, activity in these bands, can be related to aspects of behaviour and cognition. So one very well-studied component of the EEG is alpha power and the individual alpha frequency. And this has been related to a range of different cognitive outcomes, ranging from memory, processing speed, attention, and even general intelligence. So the purpose of the current study was to determine whether there are EEG-based correlates of performance on a simulated training tasks in a military context, and whether these markers track performance over time and increasing task difficulty. In the case of an association between EEG-based markers and task performance, are these markers more precise predictors of performance than established behavioural markers? So, for example, assessment by military trained staff. And our third aim was to determine whether there are resting state-derived measures of brain activity that predicts performance, and whether this differs depending on task demands and roles. So, say, for example, between gunners and commanders. So this was an extension of work where we were examining the reliability of EEG in naturalistic environments. So this goes back to what I was discussing earlier, where it's been particularly difficult to measure EEG in environments outside of the laboratory, particularly in a military context where there is often quite a lot of equipment on. So you've got protective headwear and other pieces of equipment that would often interfere with the signals that we acquire with EEG. So the work I'm presenting today is an extension of work where we were actually able to demonstrate that we were able to reliably measure EEG in a naturalistic environment with military equipment. So this study provided a unique opportunity to measure EEG during naturalistic complex decision-making in a military sample. And we used simulations from military professionals with 3 scenarios, and each scenario increased in complexity. So the first study was a simulated ground-based air defence system. And this study involved coordinated actions against simulated air threats, where the commanders had to track the position of potential enemy air threats using a geoplot, and their gunners engaged with enemies using a simulated RBS-70 air defence launcher. The second study was a simulated task gunnery, or an armoured system. And so this simulated tank task simulated the dynamics of a vehicle over several different terrains, and performance metrics were provided by a simulator. So the simulated tank task had more of an objective outcome measure, whereas the simulated ground-based air defence system involved a rating scale which was completed by 2 expert raters who typically train or provide feedback on teams during this system training. So the GBAD study involved 10 commanders and 10 gunners. So in total we had 10 dyads. So we were looking at team performance in a military context in more of a naturalistic environment. So during training, the two raters reached a consensus on the performance of the dyads using a 10-point rating scale, with 0 denoting poor performance and 10 denoting excellent performance. The armoured study similarly involved 10 dyads. So here again, we had 10 gunners and 10 commanders. And across the three scenarios, final scores for each training scenario were aggregated measures of engagements with a maximum score of 300. So there was a minimum score of 300 and maximum score of 500. If a particular dyad did not score above 300, they were not able to move on to the next training scenario. So these scores reflect the time taken to identify and successfully engage with enemies, as well as rounds fired and the accuracy of the engagement. So this was a repeated measures design with 20 dyads, containing both subjective and objective measures in a mounted and dismounted context. And during both studies, we measured EEG at rest for 2 minutes, and also during the training scenarios across each three training scenario in each study. So here we have an example of the dismounted context. So this was the dome simulator where the dyads had to engage with simulated air threats. So there was an operator console where we sat down there with the raters and the DHSS while we recorded the EEG. And in figures C and D, you can see the gunner who was sitting down and the commander standing up with their geoplot. And then figure E displays our nighttime scenario. So in this study, we had 3 scenarios. Each scenario, like I said, increased in complexity. And the third scenario was the most complex and was performed at nighttime. So the dyad found it quite difficult to visually identify possible targets and had to rely quite heavily on the geoplot. So for the experimental protocol for both the armoured and dismounted context involved 30 minutes of preparation and the resting state EEG recordings, and then each training scenario, which lasted about 10 minutes each, and again, each increasing in difficulty from easy to difficult. And we recorded EEG through each of the 3 training scenarios. So here we focused on theta and alpha activity. So theta and alpha are very well-known markers of attention, memory, cognitive load, or the difficulty of task demands. So we estimated the activity, or the strength of theta and alpha activity, in 30-second time intervals across the easy, moderate, and difficult training scenarios. And what we found was that the EEG signal quality was quite comparable to the lab-based recordings that we perform here at the neuroscience lab at UniSA, which was very good. From the resting state EEG, we estimated the individual alpha frequency and the aperiodic slope and offset. So these 3 markers are strongly related to a number of different aspects of cognition. So the individual alpha frequency has been related to the speed of information processing, but also measures of general intelligence. And more recent research has shown that the aperiodic slope, or the decay of power over increasing frequency in a typical power spectrum density plot, is also related to aspects of processing speed and other individual markers of cognition. So we were interested in determining whether we can use these metrics, which are very easily obtainable just from 2 minutes of resting state EEG, as a way of predicting how well someone would perform in something as complex as these military-based training scenarios. So we, as a strategy, we wanted to just determine the amount of experience that both the gunners and commanders reported having in both their current role and in total experience in Army for the armoured and the GBAD training scenarios. So as you'd expect, commanders overall had more experience in both their current roles and their total experiences in Army. And we also wanted to plot and examine the behavioural performance in both the armoured context and the dome simulation context. So on plot C, this is the objective system-based performance metrics from the simulated tank task, and each facet represents a particular dyad or a pair of gunner and commanders. And then we have scenarios low, medium, and high in difficulty. So sessions 1, 2, and 3 on the x-axis. So you can see there's quite a bit of variability between each of the dyads, which is great. That's what we want. And you can see the same sort of pattern of activity for the group rating in the dismounted context. So remember, the dome simulation involved subjective ratings from 2 trained professionals. So you can see that, again, there was quite a bit of variability in performance between the dyads in plot D on those subjective ratings. So what we found here was we were able to track changes in theta and alpha activity across task complexity. So for plots A and B, we have theta activity and alpha activity across training. The blue dashed line represents the commander and the solid orange line represents the gunner. And we have estimated activity during the low, medium and high sessions. And so alpha and theta activity are plotted on the y-axis, the y-axis, sorry, with less negative values indicating higher activity in these frequency bands. And so what you can see, particularly for theta, is that for the commander, theta activity increases from the low session, low difficulty session to the medium session before tapering off in the high session for the armoured study. However, for the dismounted GPA study, you can see that for both the commanders and gunners, there is a gradual increase in theta activity, but this effect seems to be more pronounced for the commanders. Interestingly, we're also able to predict how well the gunners and commanders would perform in the most difficult session, so session 3, from both behaviour and from both task-related and resting state EEG from session 1. So you can see here in figure A, so we have, this is for the subjective ratings for the stimulated enemy air threat scenario. On the y-axis, we have their ratings, so 0 to 10, 10 denoting perfect performance and 0 denoting poor performance. And on the x-axis, we have their rating from session 1. So as you would expect, people or dyads who do well on session 1 also do quite well on session 3. But what's most interesting is we were able to predict with greater power or greater capacity how well both gunners and commanders would perform based on their alpha power during session 1. And this showed a nonlinear relationship for the commanders, but not for the gunners. There was a similar pattern of results found for the armoured context, so the simulated tank task. So what we found here was that behavioural performance from the first session was not predictive of performance in the third session. However, both alpha power and theta power were highly predictive of performance, again showing a nonlinear relationship with the commanders. But interesting, the strongest predictor, was the individual alpha frequency that was estimated from just 2 minutes of resting state EEG with an R-square value to 0.45, such that as the individual alpha frequency increased, performance decreased on the simulated tank task. So based on this observation, we decided to run some exploratory machine learning analyses. And so what we did is we separated our data into both a training and a test set. And we found that for every 1 Hertz increase in IF, or the individual alpha frequency, there was a 4.46-fold increase in the odds of an individual being a gunner than a commander. And this was independent of time spent in current role or overall experience in Army. So placing these results in the context of Army, the relevance for Army. So what we've found is it's possible to collect reliable EEG signals reflecting cognitive workload from soldiers. EEG during easy training can predict individual performance on a more complex scenario than behaviour. And resting state derived EEG can differentiate between members in a team. So we're actually able to predict whether or not someone is a gunner or a commander just based on 2 minutes of resting state EEG. So from this perspective, we argue that EEG-based measures of real-time cognitive workload have the potential to add value to Army training procedures by serving as early predictors of how well an individual will perform under challenging conditions, and may also allow for biomarkers of information processing to inform role selection and individualized training. So more from a theoretical perspective, we've also demonstrated that there might be a difference in the speed of which information is taken up by both gunners and commanders by the individual alpha frequency. So we found that overall commanders had a lower individual alpha frequency, whereas gunners had a higher individual alpha frequency. And this might be functionally relevant based on the task demands that the two have to perform together when taking in information and working as a team in a complex military-based context. Thank you for your time. And I'd like to acknowledge the Department of Defence for funding this research, and also thanks to Major Tim Pexton for his invaluable role as an Army liaison during data acquisition, as well as to the military personnel who participated in the current study. Thank you.
That was a great presentation there, Zachariah, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the live Q&A. And that was right to time, which makes it even easier for us. Just to remind everyone, just pop your questions in the Q&A, and to help us track who they belong to, if you could just pop at who their name is in the front of the title, and then it makes it easier because they all do go in the same chat Q&A section. So it allows the authors to address the questions really easily. I'm going to kick off with a question. And this is just a simple user question from my point of view. So you've used the 32 channel EEG in this particular scenario. Do you think there would be opportunity to scale this down and still achieve good readable results with less channels, or is that the technology not quite currently there?
Oh no, definitely. There's quite a few off-the-shelf portable EEG systems that can have even 5 to 6 electrodes. But for something like the individual alpha frequency, we can estimate that from two channels at the back of the head. So that's definitely possible to sort of replicate what we've done here with 5 fewer channels. So 32 might have been a little bit sort of too much for what we were going for, but in our case, it was better to have more information than less. But definitely you can do it in fewer channels.
Great. Got a few questions here. So if we don't get through all of them, just pop on in and have a look. This one here is from Amy Eddles, sorry. Zach, many thanks for an excellent presentation. How do you tease apart effects of difficulty and load from session order as it was fixed order?
That's a very good question. So I don't think that's something we could have added, say, an additional factor into our models encoding the order of sessions. But I think that's something that should be sort of teased apart in future work. So we try to make these sessions as distinct as possible based on the task demands. So say, for example, in the dismounted context, the last scenario was performed in complete darkness. So that was very distinct from, say, sessions 1 and 2, where there was a lot more visual information available to the dyads. But you're right there, it is a little bit difficult to tease apart given that the order of sessions was fixed.
Thank you. There's another one here from Susanna Whitney. Fascinating work. What future work would you suggest?
So we're actually interested in determining whether, if you go back to the fact that we were able to predict or whether someone is a gunner or commander just based on those 2 minutes of EEG. Obviously, these individuals were already in their current role. So one avenue for future research could be actually measuring EEG with new recruits and having a look when people actually start training or start their current role, and then potentially having a look at where they're at maybe 12 months after that initial recording, and having a look at whether 12 months prior, of say even just 2 minutes of EEG, actually predicts where they end up being, what role they end up securing, or their training performance 12 months later. So that could be one way of further teasing apart the predictive capacity of even just 2 minutes of EEG in this context.
Great. In the interest of time, I know we've got 1 minute, but I think this one might be a little bit more convoluted to answer. So I'll get you to pop into the Q&A and answer that question that's still remaining there in the Q&A. Thanks very much, Zachariah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, now moving right along, we are sticking to time very nicely. So thank you very much to all of our presenters. The next presentation is from researcher Steph Chen, and she is actually in WA. And I'd like to just draw out the fact that our audience in WA are working really hard to attend our conference at this hour of the morning. It's currently only 7:20 over there. So thank you for that. Steph's going to actually use her recording and then she'll drop in for her Q&A. And her presentation is the impact of digital image configuration on periscope operator workload, situation awareness and performance. Thank you, Steph.
Hello, I'm Stephanie. Today I will be describing an experiment which examined the presentation of digital visual information and its impact on user cognition. The shift from optical path and mechanically rotating periscope to Optronics digitised imagery gives the RAN more flexibility in how visual data is displayed and the operating procedures for employing it. There is opportunity to take advantage of new technologies that might better support operator performance, but there is also a risk that these may not be fully considered in their implementation, and that Optronics will be developed to basically mirror the way that periscopes are currently used. In this experiment, we compared a human-machine interface, or HMI, that was developed to support a relatively similar operating procedures to current Navy, with an HMI that is not constrained by current operating procedures and tries to take advantage of more future-looking technologies. Both HMI concepts had two 27-inch displays vertically aligned. The top screen displayed the visual imagery from the periscope, and the bottom screen provided information and tools required for range and course estimates. And we investigated the impact on workload, situation awareness, and performance of novice participants. The first HMI, named Optics, represented a digital adaptation of the traditional view down a bearing periscope format. The top display presented a view down a bearing displaying approximately 20 degrees of horizontal arc. The operator could use a keyboard or mouse to move the digital periscope horizontally through 360 degrees in order to view the entire horizon, and the view could be magnified to conduct contact range and course estimates. The lower display had a number of elements, including a table of all contacts and their information, and a ranging tool. Participants were also provided a physical manual tool to estimate angle on the bow. For optics, the course was estimated by estimating angle to the bow. The angle to the bow, or ATB, is the angle between the line of sight and the bow of the contact in question. Obviously, it is visual. So we got the participants to do this by eye, but because they're novices, we gave them a tool to assist them to estimate the ATB, and you can see that on the bottom left. And for this example, if you look at the model there, the angle is about 45 degrees, and we're seeing the port size of the angle, or the ATB, is 45 port. The optics operator then inputs this into the system via their keyboard, and the system can estimate the course of that contact. To estimate the range, the operator is assisted by a ranging tool. So for the optics operator, the first task is for them to classify the vessel using the classification tool on the bottom screen. They look at what they see, and they choose the vessel, and that will provide them a known vertical distances for that class or type of vessel. The operator then adjusts two ranging lines overlaid on the display to select the vertical ranging height of the contact and to generate a subtended angle from ownership position. The participant must then select the corresponding actual height from a predetermined heights on the top right there. And the height combined with the subtended angle allow optics to compute the range. The operator then uses a manual ATB tool to estimate the ATB, and then inputs both the range and ATB into the panel and then clicks Cut. Optimus represented a future-looking design simulating digital technologies to display a 360-degree panoramic view of the horizon segmented across 5 panels on the top screen. To achieve this, the size of the contacts had to be smaller. However, we provided an analysis pane on the bottom screen which would display the selected contact at a size identical to the size seen on the Optics HMI. The Optimus HMI also provided 3-dimensional models of the vessels expected in the area, which could be used to assist in the ATB and range estimates. For Optimus, the classification task is completed in the same way as the Optics HMI. The vessel is seen, is chosen from a panel of information, and is classified. Once classification has occurred, the system provides a 3-dimensional model on the bottom right. The user can rotate the model to match that seen in the camera, which automatically yields the ATB, which you can see at the top. The user can then also move the ranging lines so they match those seen in the camera for the range. The vertical slice is automatically adjusted, so there is no need to choose from a closest height bin as they had to do in Optics. Once the range lines are positioned, the user simply clicks on the Cut button to enter the range and course, or the Solution button to enter full solution. That is, with the speed. We ask participants for a full solution for each contact. We have examined these two HMIs in 2 previous experiments, and at this point it should be noted that the simulation provides high contrast, short range visual contacts in the bright daylight, so ideal scene conditions using simulated vision. In experiment 1, we examined only participant workload and detection performance for the camera display, the top display only. We found contacts were detected faster with no cost to workload. In experiment 2, we examined the utility of the digital tools. We found slower classification, likely due to the classified panel being located in a tab behind the 3D model panel. However, more accurate ranges in ATB, faster cuts and lower workload. This was pleasing. However, the role of the periscope operator extends beyond performance gains observed in isolated contact detection and contact analysis tasks. So in the current experiment, we examined the periscope operator more holistically. The tasking was done in the context of achieving a mission or missions, and participants were asked to develop full solutions to each contact and to monitor them and refine them as necessary. We measured the variables both in high and low task load. Participants completed the experiment over 2 days. Each participant completed 4 by 24-minute scenarios, 2 in high task load and 2 in low task load conditions, as we wanted to see if any effect of HMI was sensitive to task load. In addition to behavioural data, we collected physiological data, heart rate variability and electrodermal skin conductance. These recordings are still being analysed and will not be described further. We measured performance in range and course estimates and solution accuracy. We measured workload, situation awareness and meta-awareness. I'll now describe each finding. Before I start, we report all our analyses by providing a ratio of the strength of evidence for one hypothesis, such as the alternative hypothesis, over another, such as a null hypothesis. For convenience, we present this ratio with a Bayes factor as always greater than 1. So if the evidence favours the alternative hypothesis, we report BF10. If the evidence favours the null hypothesis, we report BF01. And we use Lee and Wagenmaker's 2013 recommended interpretation of the ratio, that is, a ratio greater than 3 as moderate evidence and a ratio greater than 10 as strong evidence. And the size of the HMI or task load effect lies with a 95% probability within the credible interval error bars. So you can see we looked at the range and course error. So the lower the results, the better. And you can see Optimus, there was strong evidence for Optimus HMI supporting a more accurate range and a more accurate course. There was no evidence of any task load effect and there was no interaction. We also measured the time it took to give the initial solution. There was strong evidence for an HMI, but no task load or interaction. So Optimus was faster. Tactical picture error. We recorded the distance between participant solutions location and the actual simulation truth location to find the position error. We took the average of the position error for all contacts in 20-second bins and plotted these with time for each condition. As expected, the solutions got better over time as participants improved each solution. We haven't included the error bands and there is some overlap. However, in general, the plot shows that the task load was greater driver for performance with high task load, resulting in greater area than low task load, regardless of the HMI. However, as Optimus had a better starting solution estimates for the range and course, these benefits compounded over time, and towards the end of the scenario, it was the HMI that was the greater driver, with Optimus providing more accurate solutions in both high and low task load conditions. 2 missions were given to participants and they were framed as intelligence gathering. The first, the danger sector mission, required participants to photograph any contact that entered any of 3 different danger sectors, defined as 10 degrees either side of the port or starboard beam, or directly behind our own ship, and within a range of 4 kiluyards. Danger sector breaches had various durations. The second was the rendezvous task. This mission required participants to take a photograph of a rendezvous between any 2 contacts who approached each other, slowed down to 3 knots and changed course so they could travel side by side, which we simulated as an information handover. And each rendezvous lasted approximately 60 seconds, and you can see that there's a rendezvous occurring between a fishing vessel and a warship there. Each scenario had 2 rendezvous and 2 danger sector breaches. We used signal detection theory to calculate the sensitivity, or D prime, for detecting the 2 rendezvous and the 2 danger sector events in each scenario. A hit was defined as the correct detection of each event while it was occurring. A false alarm was defined as the photograph taken of a distractor event, and sensitivity was calculated as a difference between the hit rate and the false alarm rate Z scores. And of course, a higher D prime indicates a better ability to discriminate between the target and noise. And we can see here that Optimus, there was strong evidence that Optimus, the Optimus HMI was supported the task better than the optics HMI. The way we measured subjective workload was there's 2 ways. The first was the air traffic workload input technique, or the ATWIT, which is a 1 to 10 scale, and that was posed every 5 minutes and was visible for 10 seconds. So the greater the workload, the greater the number that they chose. And the other was the modified Cooper-Harper tool, which is a unidimensional scale that assesses how effectively the system supports the workload of the user by using decision tree to arrive at a score between 1 and 10. And again, the lower score was more desirable. As expected, workload was greater when task load was high in both subjective workload measures. The ATWIT, which was shown more frequently and perhaps a little easier to navigate, showed that users using the Optimus had lower workload overall. Situation awareness. We measured situation awareness, or SA, using a modified version of Situation Awareness Global Assessment Technique, or SAGIT, and the Situation Present Assessment Method, or SPAM. Consistent with SAGIT, 5 SA queries were presented to operators per task pause. However, while the task was paused, contact information was not blanked, but left displayed. This was based on the premise of situated SA theory, in that operators offload the SA requirements to the environment, in this case their displays, but know where to find the information when needed. Finding that information quickly indicates good SA. We examined the SA for each of the 3 levels as defined by Ensley. Well, 1 is perception of data, 2 comprehension of meaning, and 3 projection of the near future. For example, our questions were, for a perception question, how many vessels are we currently tracking? Our comprehension question might have been, which danger sector is closest to being breached? And a projection question would have been something like, where would you expect the next rendezvous? We took only the questions answered correctly into the analysis, and as expected, we found participants in both HMIs were faster in the perception questions and slower in the projection questions. However, participants using the optics had the better situation awareness, as evidenced by their faster response time. We think that the Optimus interface likely encouraged greater offboarding of information and thus greater reliance on the interface. However, due to the sacrifices made in the geospatial representation in mapping the 3D world to a 2D plane, retrieving information was not very intuitive and could have taken longer. Meta-awareness is how accurate a person is in assessing their own performance. It has been shown to independently contribute to performance. If participants understood which contact solutions were tracking well and which were not, they were better placed to know which contacts needed updating and to prioritise. We measured their meta-awareness by including a question in the SAGIT pause about their confidence on a specific and recent contact solution. Participants responded on a 5-point Likert scale from very confident to not confident at all. We correlated the score in each query against the position error for the same contact. The correlation was stronger in optics, meaning that the participants had greater meta-awareness when using optics. This might be because in optics, the user had to do more and had greater immersion in the analysis, like manipulating the ATB tool and explicitly judging the vertical height, meaning they could be more in tune with how well they did in these tasks. So to summarise, Optimus had faster and more accurate tactile picture, a better mission performance and lower perceived workload. However, participants showed lower SA and lower meta-awareness when using Optimus. In conclusion, Optimus holds an advantage in that it can improve performance whilst reducing workload. However, decrements to the situational awareness and meta-awareness are potentially problematic. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much there, Steph, and thanks so much for coming in at such an early hour over there in the West to have a chat with us today and answer these questions. There's a couple of them there within the app, and I'll just start off with this one from Igor Ziba. Did the operators on the Optimus system have the opportunity to observe the horizon in full screen to detect contacts where only masks could be seen?
Yeah, the Optimus had the smaller vessels and also the horizon, but they also had the analysis pane on the lower screen. They could see the horizon, and the contacts had the same size as the one in optics. So yeah, they could see the horizon in both.
Great. Thank you very much. And there's another couple here, just keeping on the time. Did the operators using the Optimus systems have the opportunity to detect airborne targets at all?
We didn't use airborne targets in the experiment, but we were conscious that the sky needed to be within the picture to make it realistic. We didn't include that in the experiment, though. That is one of the costs of trying to put a 360-degree horizon onto a single console, is that you do have that cost in horizon and sky real estate. So that was one of the things that we considered, but we didn't include that in the experiment.
Yep, and then there's another question here by Susanna Whitney, who actually has asked a question that I was going to ask, which is good. How do you think we can mitigate against the loss of situational awareness?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've got a follow-up experiment, and we think the loss of situational awareness might have been about the HMI encouraging the operator to offboard their information more, because it's easier to offboard to a full 360-degree environment. So it's easier to let the HMI do the effort to do the work. But it may not have been as intuitive as it could have been in retrieving that information for the situational awareness. So we're looking at how those panels are configured. Could we configure them in a way that was more intuitive for the retrieval of information? So that's one way of that we're looking at to try and mitigate that loss in situational awareness.
Great, thanks so much. And just keep an eye on the Q&A, and reminder to everyone that if you put the presenter's name first, it allows the presenter to go back and find the questions that relate to their actual presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Steph, and really appreciate the early morning start that you've had. Enjoy the rest of the day. Moving to our next presenter today, before we have our morning break, is Bianca Probert, who is down in Tasmania from our DST nutrition team, and she'll be presenting today on dietary supplement use in the ADF. Is it time for a change? Thank you, Bianca.
Thanks, Katie. Oh dear. Katie, I'm having trouble getting my...
I think you need to click on the actual screen that's in the actual presentation mode.
Is that right?
Yep, there we go. Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So prior to starting today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Pay Me Rimana land from which I'm presenting today. I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues, Rosa Peterson and Bradley Baker, as this work has been very much a team effort. So today I will be presenting our research on dietary supplement use in the ADF and a case for change. We're hoping that today's presentation will stimulate discussion and encourage engagement with a broad range of stakeholders on the way forward. So as defined by the International Olympic Committee consensus statement, dietary supplements and the high performance athlete, a dietary supplement is a food component, nutrient or non-food compound that is consumed on top of the regular diet for a specific purpose, whether that be for health or performance benefit. So from this definition, there is a wide range of subtypes that can also be identified. These range from products with good evidence to support their safety and effectiveness in enhancing health or performance when used correctly. And examples of these are your sports foods, medical supplements, and performance supplements. This definition also includes a wide range of other substances that are banned and or potentially dangerous, such as stimulants and prohormones. Australian research indicates that ADF members use dietary supplements at much higher rates than the general Australian population. From our research on supplement use across all three services, where we considered regular use to be the use of at least one or more supplements per week, we found that regular supplement use ranged from 70 to 78%, with ARMY recording the highest proportion of regular users. This is almost twice the use indicated by the most recent general Australian population data, indicating that 43% of respondents had used a supplement in the previous 2 weeks prior to the survey. So from international data from military populations overseas, we can foresee that this level of dietary supplement use among our ADF members is also likely to increase, as these are, the increasing trends are being seen overseas in our overseas military populations. So there are a number of factors that need to be considered when we look at dietary supplement use in the ADF and if change is required. One of those is the concern that our ADF members often experience periods of poor energy and nutrient intakes during training and deployment that may lead to compromised health and performance. Research indicates that several dietary supplements are supported by good to strong evidence for enhancing aspects of performance. To maintain a performance edge over adversaries, the use of dietary supplements that are safe, effective, and appropriate should be considered, particularly when nutritional requirements cannot be met by food during training and deployment. For example, protein supplements may be used to assist an individual to meet their protein requirements when training load is high and it is difficult to meet recommended protein intakes from food alone. Whilst creatine supplementation is considered efficacious when consumed on top of the normal diet or regular diet in conjunction with a training program to augment muscle adaptation and improve overall training outcomes. Another concern with the ADF population is the self-administration of dietary supplements that has been reported in our research. The indiscriminate self-administered use of supplements can be dangerous, with many commercially available supplements linked to adverse side effects or contaminated with substances that are banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency, better known as WADA, and are border-controlled substances. Adverse side effects resulting from the use of supplements were commonly reported in our research, with a range from 9 to 16% of regular supplement users experiencing one or more side effects from the supplements they had been using. Unsafe supplement use practices were also identified in the Army and the Air Force populations, both reporting the use of at least 4 different dietary supplements per week. We are currently finishing the analysis of our Navy data, So it will be interesting to see if similar numbers of supplements used per week were also reported with this population. So the stacking of supplements is a common practice among general supplement users. And due to the increased risk associated with combining supplements, the stacking or use of multiple performance-related supplements simultaneously is not recommended. An increased demand for dietary supplements in the ADF, in the absence of expert guidance on their safety and efficacy, may coincide with increased prevalence of adverse side effects and members failing mandatory drug tests. So currently the use of dietary supplements is governed by the Defence Act 1903. That also includes the Defence Prohibited Substances Determination 2021 that prohibits the use of all substances registered on the WADA Prohibited Substances and Methods lists by all ADF members. In support of this legislation, the ADF has a policy to control the use of dietary supplements by its members, detailed in the Defence Health Manual. The policy provides guidance on the use of dietary supplements and complementary medicines to ensure that ADF personnel are aware of the potential impact that supplements may have on their health and performance, as well as their ADF missions. However, it is becoming increasingly apparent that the WADA criteria to classify a substance as banned does not align with Defence's role and purpose. In particular, the criteria potential to enhance sports performance and violates the spirit of sport. What we can also note is that currently there is no Defence governance in place for the provision of supplements to those who may benefit from their use, or an ADF-wide system for providing members with access to expert guidance on nutrition and dietary supplements. The limitations of current Defence governance making it unclear whether Defence health policies would support the prescription and supply of performance-related dietary supplements by qualified health professionals. So a potential solution to the limitations with the current supply and use of dietary supplements in the ADF are the practices implemented in Australian national sporting organisations. A number of these organisations have implemented robust evidence-based policies to enable the use of health and performance-related dietary supplements by their athletes. Athletes belonging to these sporting organisations are provided with access to suitably qualified health professionals, such as accredited sports dietitians, to receive guidance on their supplement use, including, where appropriate, the provision of supplements that are known to be safe and effective for enhancing their performance and/or recovery, according to a standardised dietary supplement classification system. So the aim of our current work was to investigate whether the Australian Institute of Sport Supplement Management Framework could be used as a basis to develop a bespoke system for managing performance-related dietary supplement use in the ADF. So the AIS Supplement Management Framework classifies individual supplements into 4 groups based on scientific evidence that determine whether a product is safe, legal, and effective in improving athletic health and/or performance. The framework provides guidance regarding the use of individual supplements and on the monitoring of this use by health professionals. So Group A supplements are those with strong scientific evidence to recommend use according to evidence-based best practice. Group A is then broken down into a further 3 categories of supplements that are your sports foods. So examples of sports foods are your sports drinks, carbohydrate gels, and protein supplements. We then have performance supplements, and creatine is an example of a performance supplement, and medical supplements. And examples of these are iron, calcium, and vitamin D. Group B supplements are those with promising scientific research that warrants further investigation. These supplements should only be used as part of an approved research protocol. Examples include food polyphenols, such as dark chocolate and berries, antioxidants, and ketone supplements. Group C contains supplements with very little scientific evidence for health or performance benefit. Supplements in this category are generally not recommended for use. Examples of the Group C supplements are vitamin E, magnesium, and branched chain amino acids. And our final group, Group D, contains the substances that are listed on the WADA prohibited substances list. Border-controlled drugs and or banned substances that could lead to a positive drug test and disciplinary action, but are also potentially harmful if consumed. Examples of Group D supplements include stimulants, purported prohormones, growth hormone releases, and peptides. The results from our investigation found that evidence related to the safety and efficacy of supplements has been translated into a robust framework by the AIS, which has been used as a basis by national sporting organisations to develop policies on dietary supplement use. Provisions of supplements in accordance with the AIS framework has been shown to reduce the risks of individuals using contaminated products, banned substances, and the misuse of potentially dangerous products, whilst ensuring the consistent delivery of evidence-based information by health professionals employed under the program. So from our results, we conclude that an ADF supplement management framework has the potential to improve the supplement practices of ADF members by acting as an evidence-based guidance system delivered by appropriately qualified health professionals. It also has the potential to improve the systems that manage supplement use in the ADF to support our members to maintain a performance edge over adversaries, whilst it is also promising in that it would reduce the risks of adverse events resulting from dietary supplement use. So to continue our investigation, we understand the importance and need to engage with a wide range of ADF stakeholders to understand how an ADF supplement management framework may be achieved. The elements of our future work will include the engagement with elite athletic subject matter experts, which will help us to understand and identify the key considerations, in particular the legal, logistic, practical, and philosophical elements relating to the implementation and use of an ADF supplement management framework. We will also engage and employ facilitated engagement with a wide range of ADF health and performance stakeholders to help us to further evaluate the merit of this approach in the ADF environment. We will also investigate the use of the framework by piloting the management system with a small ADF population. The result will be recommendations for the development, endorsement, implementation and use of a robust and legal ADF supplement management framework to reduce health and performance risk and improve outcomes for our defence community. So that concludes today's presentation, and I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you so much, Bianca. It was a great presentation, and looks like we really could do with some changes in this space into the future. I'm going to cheekily ask the first question because I have a bit of an investment in this space, just a bit of a pet hobby that I have on the side. And my question is that we know that the fillers in supplements are currently generally not listed on ingredients lists, and some of them can actually be quite noxious or deleterious to one's health over repeated exposure. How would we envisage moving forward in this space in the future? Would you proceed to get a panel of fully analysed supplements of approved and safe known supplements if this is how we would go into the future?
Yeah, and that's a really great question because they are certainly many or captures some of the elements that we really need to consider when we go down this path, particularly if we are going to say look at a defence specific list. So if we were to, for example, move away from the WADA list, then how would we manage and, I guess, determine what would belong on a defence-specific list of supplements? What the AIS framework does do is that it encourages the use of supplements that have had independent testing, such as your HASTA testing and things like that. So that determines that there isn't anything nasty in there that's not listed on the ingredients, or anything that could potentially, whether it's an illegal substance or potentially dangerous substance has been included in that product. So there are some of the ideas that we would use going forward to reduce any risk from the potential dangerous ingredients.
Yep. Thank you. And there's just one from Eugene Aidman. Bianca, WADA regulates the artificial and profitable game called sport. Do you think a wholesale application of WADA or even AIS rules to defence is a wise move?
That's a fantastic question. And I really think that is something that we will need to tease out from this engagement with our broader stakeholders. And really that question just highlights the numerous things that we need to consider if we are going to go down this path. It's not going to be easy, but I think we can really agree that there is a need to investigate it, because currently what's happening isn't really working.
Another one here from Major Emma Williams. Excellent translatable talk, Bianca. Agree with need to improve governance around supplements. Do we risk normalising or promoting supplement use, even in situations in barracks where members should be accessing fresh food over supplements? A focus on better nutrition literacy with access to appropriate foods in messes needs to go hand in hand with access to supplements in the field. Are you able to comment on that?
I completely agree. Our approach is food first and supplements come later on when there is a need that has been identified. And that's really what, addressing the governance that surrounds the use of supplements would do, is that it would, certainly drive those messages that nutrition and delivery of good food to our members is our first priority. However, we do understand that there are situations where that does not occur or cannot occur, and therefore we need to look at other opportunities where we can improve their performance and their overall health.
Great, and I've got probably time for one more here. And let me just find it here. This is from Kagan Dakar. Bianca, many substances on the WADA list don't actually have much research around enhancing performance. Example, little to no research, doses not optimal, etc., and are often banned on predicted or unfair advantage or concerns of negative effects without data. Is there potentially a place for considering substances outside the sports realm? Safe and effective are key, but managing risk and benefit is important.
Absolutely, and that's why, again, we feel that there is a need for us to go down this path, because we aren't looking at an athletic population, we're looking at a defence population, and they have different needs and different purpose. And there are certainly, as I mentioned within the presentation, that there are aspects to the criteria that a substance needs to meet to, be placed onto the WADA banned list that really are not applicable to defence. So if this gives us an opportunity to identify those substances, and we can also, find the evidence and the support that they are safe, but also effective in improving performance, then absolutely, I think that is something that we need to explore further.
Great. I'm going to call this session closed in just a minute, but I need you to go in and have a look at the questions that have been put in this session. There's quite a lot there for you to tend to, so which is really exciting.
Very good.
And we'll close this session. We'll go to our tea break. But first of all, I just want to thank you for our presenters this morning. It's been a great morning of research that has been presented, very dynamic and very exciting for our future in this space. So just congratulate, if you're in the room with some people locally there, then give them a high five. And thank you so much for joining this session, and we'll be meeting back here in 20 minutes. Thank you.